Hello. Ma'am, can you start with the seminar?
No, she has muted.
Hi. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
एक बार बोल रहे हेलो मैम
Can you just speak something?
Yeah, hi, this is Shraddha. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Just 1 second. I'm just trying to attach a mic.
Yeah.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, ma'am. Firstly, thank you so much, ma'am, for joining the meeting in such a short notice. And so I'll start with the introduction part.
Yeah.
Good morning to one and all present here. I am Mr. Ashraf Kasmani, student at DYPUSOP University School of Pharmacy, studying at second year B Farm. Would like you all to welcome you to third day of 61st National Pharmacy Week celebration. So for day 3, we have conducted a seminar on topic mental health awareness. So what is mental health awareness? Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress related to others and make choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood and adolescence throughout adulthood. This was a short introduction for our today's topic of the seminar. Now, I would like to introduce you to our speaker of the day, Ms. Shraddha Sidwani. Ms. Shraddha Sidwani is a certified psychologist, psychotherapist, and founder of an organization known as Reality and You. She is currently practicing in Bandra West, Mumbai. She is certified from Rehabilitation Council of India (RCI) and have been formally trained in rational emotional behavioral therapy (REBT). She is also an associate fellow and supervisor from AEI Institute, USA. She has also been certified as a single session therapist trained by the founder Dr. Wingate Ryan in a limited amount of time. Problems related to anger, addiction, anxiety, depression in children, adolescents, and martial discord, among others, are addressed in this session. Also, she has been certified as one of the India's first tobacco brain specialists, TTS, from the Mayo Clinic, USA. Now, I would like to request ma'am to continue with the session.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm sorry. I think there was a technology issue here. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen. So we all know that, is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we all have seen that, yes, after the COVID pandemic, we have seen a huge rise, and I would definitely say that we have destigmatized mental health, emotional well-being to a large extent. I think there's great acceptance among all schools, colleges, workplaces, and the general public about mental health issues. Today, we see a lot of people coming forward willingly, to gain therapy and to handle their issues. So when we talk about mental health, what are the aspects we are looking at? One is we are looking at emotional issues. When we talk about emotions, we are talking about feelings such as anger, hurt, guilt, shame. Shame is the feeling of not feeling good enough. All of us are through, when I see a lot of students in their 20s, I see a lot of them putting pressure on themselves because they want to fit in. They want to fit a particular box, that immediately after college we want to acquire a job. After job they want to further get a growth curve. So constantly in this life battle, which I keep telling them that, when does it end? And it never ends, because we want to keep achieving and growing. And while we keep achieving and growing, the responsibilities of life also increase. So you have social responsibilities, you have family responsibilities, and that is when we become extremely hard on ourselves. So one thing that I will emphasize today is also about self-compassion. Self-compassion is about being kind to ourselves. And I often see that as we age, there is a great reduction in the levels of self-compassion. So mental health is basically talking about three aspects. One is about our thoughts, about our feelings, and our behavior. It is about handling stress and dealing with the obstacles of life. Now, some of the warning signs of what issues that we can have is, one is biologically the body either shuts down. So you will see immediately with somebody who's having mental health issues that they will have a lot of behavioral issues. So somebody who's been very extroverted may become introverted. Somebody who's been very friendly may try avoid situations of day-to-day life. So that is one of the main important issues and important symptoms of seeing what a person can have. Sleep is generally affected. So I will say this again later on in some of my slides, but sleep, oversleeping or undersleeping, both are an issue. So sometimes in depression, people can oversleep. In anxiety, people do not get sleep. You can have a lot of nightmares during your sleep. Mood issues are also seen, as part of the mental health symptom, where we see a lot of people becoming, specifically after COVID, we have seen the fears going up. So when I talk about fears, it is also a generalized anxiety. This was the first time where we saw death in a very large scale. For many of us, and for most of us, this was the first pandemic that we faced. So the fear of death, the fear of suffering, the fear of failure, the fear of judgment, these are things that we covered in therapy. Again, social withdrawal is an important sign that we need to assess for. So we completely disconnect from our family, from our friends. Drop in functioning, like you see here. Drop in functioning is again with day-to-day activities. So it could be with your academics, it could be with your peers, it could be with self-care activities of, going and exercising. Eating is also a very important indicator, where some people in depression may overeat while others may not feel hungry at all. Substance abuse is a form of a coping mechanism. So a lot of people who are not handling their negative feelings well, look for, addictions such as alcohol. We have seen, and I myself have done a study and we have published it, that we have seen a rise in addiction through COVID and post it. So mostly when we talk to our parents, when we talk to our friends, that we want to meet a therapist, we generally hear, okay, what's wrong with you? But today I would request people to start looking at mental health as a learning curve, as something that we do. So as we go to the gym for our physical fitness, we go to a therapist for our brain fitness. Now, when we go to a therapist, it is not that, people are going to term you as depressed or psychotic. Psychotic people are one who are not in touch with reality. So to give you some examples of them, they could be people who hear voices, who have extreme fears or delusions, that somebody is following them, they've been possessed, something may happen to their loved one. So there can be delusions which are false belief, which once that comes in the mind, it is extremely difficult to go on with life because you feel the contrary is not possible. So there is a lot of public stigma around mental health. There's a lot of which we call social stigma. There's also a lot of stealth stigma that why do I need to go to a therapist? Why can't I handle my emotions? What is wrong with me? Why can't I control my thoughts? And of course, the stigma that comes with the organization. However, today I'm very proud to say that most organizations and corporate houses, most hospitals do have facilities for the employees also, for mental health purposes. So most of this has come from the lack of understanding, and the fears get exaggerated when we don't understand our emotions. When there has been misleading representations in the media. So one example we saw with the Sushant Singh case, where we said a depressed person, somebody in the media reported and said a depressed person does not smile, but Sushant Singh smiled through his events and public appearances. However, that's not true. A depressed person can also continue smiling. It is not that they stop smiling in their depression. Now, when we talk about anxiety, what are we looking at? So I want to make a firm distinction between general worries and, what we term as anxiety or panic attacks. So when we look at worries, they are anticipation of something negative that will happen. And anxiety is extremely debilitating there, where the anxiety overwhelms the person. It can be generalized and vague anxiety, or it could be extremely specific, which we know specific phobias of heights, we know elevators, we know insects. Fear of flying is something that we have currently seen during COVID. So it is long lasting, unlike the worries which, just come and go away. The anxiety also impairs the daily functioning of the person. So the person is, for example, it affects his confidence, his self-identity. They are not able. So in COVID and through COVID, we have seen a huge rise in something that we call as social anxiety, where people feared being in public places. For 2 months, for 2 years, I think the brain stopped, the brain works in patterns. So the brain stopped seeing large gatherings as comfortable, because we became very comfortable in our own spaces. So when people started going out in public, and I'm talking about the youth, the children and the adults, people started getting a lot of panic attacks. Till today, we have very high cases of panic attacks being reported. Now, what is a panic attack? It is intense feeling of being out of control. So you can be restless, you can have palpitations, sweating. Sometimes you become unconscious in panic attacks. The question here is, how do we help a person through their panic attack? So when somebody is having a panic attack, we need to provide reassurance to the person. So in college, I'm sure you may have people who are suffering from panic attacks before the exams, during the exams. There are 3 modes in which the brain moves. One is your fight, flight, and freeze. So in a panic attack, a lot of time people freeze. So this is when we need to give them the adequate assurance that don't worry, try to do your best. Now, why do people have panic attacks? A lot of, disruptive thinking patterns. So when we are looking at thinking patterns, we are looking at perfectionism. So people have extremely high standards of themselves. And when people set very high standards on themselves and they're not able to catch up to them, they feel not good enough. They can worry, they can have extreme anxiety. The other pattern that is very common seen among students is also seeking validation. So sorry, I think, can the other participants mute? Yeah. So when we are looking at validation, it is being approved by other people. So none of us want to be disapproved by people. None of us like the concept of rejection. But none of us want to be perceived negatively. So when we don't get the right validation among our peers, among our college, among our professors, among our parents, that is when we start questioning ourselves. So these are certain patterns that can lead to panic attacks. What is depression? So depression has been a term which has been loosely used among a lot of people that I feel depressed. But I think we have to make a very clear distinction between sadness as an emotion and depression as a very clinical state which requires help. So while we can be sad and we can have lows and highs, not all days, not all 24 hours are going to be normal. So you can feel low and high. And this is also hormonally related. So if you have thyroid issues, or women before their periods every month can feel low. Women also going through PCOD, PCOS symptoms can feel low. While people do go through their ups and downs, depression is a clinical state where you have extreme periods of sadness. So they are persistent, where you feel extremely negative about yourself or the surroundings that you are in. You can go through insomnia or hypersomnia, which is lack of sleep or excessive sleeping. You can also binge eat on a lot of food. Binge eating, coming from the topic of binge eating, a lot of body image issues can also lead to depression, where we sort of critically judge ourselves. Now, depression interferes with our day-to-day living, where we are unable to do day-to-day acts, like, again, exercising, socializing. So your self-care activities are reduced. Psychological trauma. Trauma is, I think all of us must have seen the case of, which is going on in the media, of Shraddha. I think that itself can lead to a lot of psychological trauma, because constantly viewing such cases, constantly reading and hearing about this kind of abuse, whether it was a physical, sexual, emotional, all aspects of abuse, can lead to something called PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, you have a lot of flashes during a post-traumatic incident. So any of these traumas can, so this is what we are seeing in the media currently. It could be a secondary trauma or an indirect exposure to a traumatic event. We see this in a lot of cases of domestic violence, where parents are fighting or they are going through divorces. We see a lot of trauma there as well. Moving on to something which is grief. I think we all went through some kind of grief, and we all go through grief in our life. We have a very famous author, Dr. Kessler, who talks about the stages of grief. And if you can see on my screen, you start with the bargaining stage. Then you have, you start with the denial stage, where we not acceptance of the grief. Then as the grief processes, we are angry as to why it has happened to us and why me. That question comes on. As we move forward, the depression sets in. Then we bargain with ourselves, and finally we accept the grief. Now, grief does not mean only death. So while we have lost a lot of family members or friends through COVID, that was one way of experiencing grief. But the other way of experiencing grief is also a loss of a relationship. So you can have a breakup with your boyfriend and experience grief. You can have a relationship loss, you can have a job loss, many life changes. So I think in COVID, we also saw, people transitioning from their houses, losing their jobs. We are anticipating a recession. We are seeing a lot of people losing their jobs even today in the big IT companies. So all this can have a huge impact on grief. In grief, we can also see excessive crying. They can also get palpitations, or they can get depressed. So these are the different forms of grieving. Now, from a very student perspective, I think, and through and post the pandemic, as a therapist, I get a lot of cases of, I don't feel good about myself. How do I get back my motivation? How do I handle exhaustion? There was a lot of burnout, especially with the healthcare industry. We have seen that there was extreme burnout and something what we call as compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is where we get exhausted taking care of people in our house, or family or friends who we are taking care of physically, mentally, and emotionally. That is when we start losing the motivation towards life. And, because we lose the motivation, we get into a procrastination. Procrastination is delaying things. I think most of us must be experiencing procrastination, where we say, okay, we'll do it tomorrow, we'll study tomorrow, we'll handle these things tomorrow. So you do not weigh the pros and cons, and you start delaying things because you want adequate motivation. You want to work under time pressure. Now, when there is no time pressure, so there are no exams scheduled, we keep delaying the studies. That would be a form of procrastination. So in order to get out of the procrastination, we have to stop the black and white thinking. So they all or nothing thinking, that we don't have to work in extremes. So I would say try to balance it out. So even days where we do not have adequate motivations, you still can get up and go to college. You can still get up and go for your classes. There is no technique. There is no technique in mental health where we say, okay, you follow this program and, you will be fine. So there's no one size fits all. The therapies are all tailor-made depending on the goals, what the client wants to handle. In terms of habit building, there's an extremely good book by this author, which is called Atomic Habits. I'm sure most of you all must have heard about it, where he talks about building, getting out of the dysfunctional patterns of the brain and getting into new habits. So internal motivation is something that we talk about today. So in the pandemic, we saw the internal motivation or the drive going down. So external forms of motivating is obviously money being one of the biggest forms. You get rewards, you get awards. But as we see getting out of college, university, we see at work, if you don't get an award, you still need to perform. The competition and the fears are very high. You may not necessarily get promoted if we are looking at we are today in a world with a lot of negativity. We see there's a climate change, there is a war crisis going on, and now also the recession setting in. So we need to find internal forms of motivation. Now, when we talk about internal forms, we are talking about the right attitude or the mindset with which we can move on in life. So in terms of the right attitude, we have to keep the curiosity on. We have to not look at, just focusing on perfectionist goals, but allowing ourselves to skill building. So I think two things that I would like you all to focus as youth is, one, do not look at your degrees as things that will get you to the job, but also the skill building that we are doing, which is parallel to the degree. And in terms of that, when I'm talking about skill building, I'm also talking about personality. So, what is the personality? So you are going to have failures in life. You are going to have a lot of obstacles in life. Let's say, for example, tomorrow a boss you may get upset with him for the way he's talking to you. How are you going to handle that? You may not get the validation that you thought, no matter you may have got excellent grades, or you may have topped your university, but you may not get a job adequately. So how do you handle those obstacles? How do you keep going on is internal motivation. So look within yourself, see your skill sets. A very important variable that we see currently in media and outside in the world is aggression. Again, with the recent case in the media, we have seen that aggression can be disastrous and life-threatening. So when we are talking about aggression, we are talking about attacking, we are talking about a very demanding mindset where we have to get what we want. And when we don't get it, we feel extreme amounts of frustration. There is something called low frustration tolerance. I definitely think as a society, our tolerance level to frustration is going down. So we become very reactive rather than responsive. We hurt other people's feelings, and at times we hurt our own self, which is called a self-defeating attitude, and which we see in cases of suicide. So I think there are a lot of negative outcomes with aggression. What we need to see is how do we become more assertive in our styles of communication. When we are looking at assertiveness, we're talking about being firm but stern, being respectful but being kind and compassionate. So this would help us in conflict resolution. So there are a lot of people who become passive and want to avoid conflicts. So I have a lot of cases which say, oh, I don't want to talk about uncomfortable conversations. Unfortunately, that's not possible. There will be instances where we need to, and we will have to deal with conflicts, whether at work or in our relationships. So getting a very solution-focused attitude and mindset will encourage and will come to positive outcomes. Sometimes it becomes very difficult to take the right decision. So people say, okay, so what is right and what is wrong? And we always want to be right. But sometimes there are only two parts left. One is that it will be a difficult outcome, and one is it's a worst outcome. So there is no right outcome there, and we need to make difficult choices. So when we spoke about low frustration tolerance, it is minor everyday inconveniences. You see this on the road. We see road rage, which is an example of low frustration tolerance, to your traffic jams, or to kids, to dirty roads, or to unclean surroundings. So we need to accept and build ourselves to accepting the frustrations of life. And one way to do that is, of course, sitting back at the end of the day, using a relaxation techniques. In this digital modernized world, I think there are a lot of techniques on social media. We have apps such as Spotify, where we have calming, a relaxation calming technique. So if you type calming techniques on Spotify, you will have pre-recorded sessions, you have podcasts to, understand your emotions more. So yes, I think first technique is to sort of acknowledge that I'm going through the anxiety, I'm going through the frustration, I am dealing with procrastination. So one is to acknowledge it. Once you have acknowledged it, it is important to disengage from your anxiety or your depression or your guilt. Once you disengage your emotion, then you have to reassure yourself. So it is ADR. So if you want, that's a huge thing that you can take away from today's session, is remind yourself to acknowledge the emotion, then you disengage. When I'm talking about disengaging, is you're detaching it, that I am not my anxiety, I am going through an anxiety. I am not my depression, I am going through a depressive phase. I am not a bad person, but I did something bad. So a lot of people say that we judge ourselves by judging our behavior. But in therapy, we teach you to distinguish between the two. So we teach you how to encourage and accept yourself unconditionally while you judge your behavior as good and bad. The other aspects about mental health, like I said, the brain works in a pattern. So enabling the brain to set a routine, in terms of sleep, going to bed, waking up, are certain patterns that we can set. And I think we already said that in colleges. In terms of the temperature, when you sleep, you need a particular temperature. It cannot be too hot or too cold for adequate sleep. There are phases in sleep that you may have learned through your science programs. Okay, you can use certain lavender oils, or like we said, a relaxation technique. We can hear of some relaxation technique in order to get sleep. A lot of people tell me that when we go to sleep on our bed, we are unable to sleep because there are a lot and excessive thoughts. Now, these thoughts are called ruminating thoughts. So we are unable to block these thoughts. So one technique that you can use for this is the stop technique, where we consciously instruct our brain, stop, 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 and we divert it into something else. So if you're in a phase of rumination, I would say get up from your bed, start reading something. Okay, don't sit and ruminate and try to get sleep. You can't try to get sleep. Sleep has to come to you. So, try to maintain a ritual before your sleep. It could be a hot shower, it could be some music or some meditation. Avoid any type of caffeine or nicotine, post 1:30 in the afternoon. So caffeine disrupts your sleep cycle. Alcohol disrupts your sleep cycle. A lot of people, like I said, use substances to also unwind. In a lot of medical schools, I have also had students from medical schools who unwind with a lot of weed and hash, and that becomes an addiction. So avoiding those, because there are long-term effects of that. People become very paranoid, where there are a lot of delusions and fears associated to long-term use of weed. Something that we have seen is melatonin. Now, melatonin is an important chemical for sleep. It helps us sleep. So taking, if you have very high issues with sleep, you can look at taking melatonin, which like you all must be knowing, you can get it on the counter. However, too much of it will not be adequate. Eating the right amount of food is important, because we see people with excessive dieting habits, and that leads to disruptive sleep patterns. Now, very, very important for us, the rates of suicide have been increasing. So anybody going into a shell, like I said, isolating, avoiding conversations, doing reckless behavior, if you see cutting, talking about aggressive acts towards themselves, please don't dismiss these acts. Don't dismiss the feelings, don't dismiss the thoughts. Please take an account of it. We have seen a lot of medical schools reporting high rates of suicide. Lack of interest in activity, anger, irritability, not, if somebody keeps reporting that they don't feel adequate in themselves, they feel low, please take it up seriously and guide them to a therapist. Now, what are some of the questions that we can hide? Because generally when somebody talks about suicide, the response is we get very overwhelmed. What should I do? You feel like, it becomes your problem. So, ask questions about, is there some place where you can seek help? Would you like me to guide you to a therapist? Okay. Be there and encourage them to seek that support. Sometimes because we want to maintain confidentiality, we don't want to report it to others. So while you maintain confidentiality, it is your duty to inform an adult, because the person can act upon their negative thoughts. So it is in today's world very, very important to develop. So while we have on one side the obstacles and failures of life, what we do today is to develop adequate coping strategies. So thought stopping, like we said, is, when we get ruminative negative thoughts, you keep telling yourself to stop. And then we restructure the thought, which is called cognitive restructuring. So you acknowledge your thought, it's negative. You tell yourself, okay, so the immediate thought in anxiety is, I can't handle it. It's too much. It's too overwhelming. That is the time where we say, okay, I acknowledge it is my anxiety. I disengage with it. I take another perspective and I reassure myself. A very good technique is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where we become mindful. We have 5 senses. Mindfulness is something that is picked up in a huge way over the last 2 years. And mindfulness is, just observing your 5 senses, just perceiving through your 5 senses. So it is, we see, we touch, we smell, we taste, and we hear our surroundings. So it's a basic meditation that we can do. Giving yourself positive affirmations, that I'm confident. Even if I'm not, I will try to do my best. We are all fallible human beings. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and we will keep learning and growing. Maintaining a gratitude journal has been very helpful and has been seen that it helps through your anxiety and depression. So concentrating on the smaller things in life, whether it is, that we are able and capable of coming to college, grasping the knowledge, and we will put it to use. So releasing yourself of any, validation or pressures that we put on ourselves. Another thing that I can also tell here is people can, in order to, understand what is your negative self-thought, you can either record it on a gadget or play it to your friend, your best friend, and ask them that, do you think it is positive or negative the way I talk to myself? So you will often see that it is a very, very self-critical talk. Now here, I also want to highlight that as there are physical needs, and I don't know through school if you all have learned about Maslow's needs of hierarchy, there are also psychological needs. So Maslow's needs were about, food, water, shelter, and then higher needs of self-actualization. We have psychological needs, the need of autonomy, which is freedom, and the competence needs, which is growth and learning. And the third need, and the most important need, is the need of connection, right? Of relatedness. Now we have seen when these psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness are low, generally a person is more frustrated and is more depressed. So today we need to help others and ourselves to uplift our psychological needs, to ensure that, yes, if we are not getting freedom, at our families or in our relationships, how can we allow ourselves, to get control back into our lives? So, doing small acts of creativity, drawing, singing, music, dance, these can be ways of empowering ourselves. With competence and growth, of course, we are doing a course, we want to go through our degrees, but we also can build other skill sets. With relatedness, I think we need to learn to be assertive. There are a lot of introverted people that I see who find it extremely difficult. And like I said, there is a lot of social anxiety to talk to people. So here, try and build small groups of communication. Try to connect to smaller groups and try to address your anxiety. Most importantly here, I think I don't want anybody now to go and, Google up the words. So I think Google and social media have been a huge medium for us, mental health practitioners, to reach out to the public. And this is primarily because we wanted to destigmatize mental health, especially in India. And we wanted people to come out and reach for help because we saw the rates of suicide going up. However, these are not professional platforms where we can diagnose people. So today, in the telehealth world, I'm proud to say that India has also made a huge step where tele mental health services are there. There are a lot of platforms that have come through. where you can seek online therapy, even if you do not want to travel to your therapist's room. So I think that is it. This is certain references where you can look up for mental health. I also run an NGO through which we are having this session by the name of Reality and You Foundation. We are very active on Instagram. We do also, and we do have certain talks that we have done with established therapists around the world, where we talk about mental health issues in general. So I think we've covered most of it all. Yeah, any questions from you all?
Guys, do you have any questions regarding the session?
So I just want to start, end it with the fear of failure and judgment. Nobody wants to fail, like I said, nobody wants to be rejected. But unfortunately, at a lot of times, we do face failure and rejection. And when I'm talking about failure, I'm not talking about exam failure, but I'm talking about a failure of disappointing ourselves. So I think we have to get out of this unrealistic demand that we will always meet our standards. Many a times in life, we are unable to meet our standards. So it does not have to be a linear graph. There are going to be ups and downs in life. Okay. And when we go through ups and downs, we don't necessarily become superior or inferior, because I hear a lot of people evaluating that themselves as, oh, if I earn so much, I will be superior. If I buy a house and a car, finally I will be superior. Or they keep judging themselves as inferior. So I think the most important aspect is of self-acceptance. That we are going to have our ups and downs, but we can accept our weaknesses and work on them. Anybody wants to be courageous enough to express and be vulnerable enough to tell us any weakness of theirs from the audience? Any weakness. I pointed out a few of them. One was procrastination, one is perfection, one is social validation. So these can be our weaknesses. But once we understand our pattern, we can go forward and address it. Anybody? Yes, is he putting his hand up? Any questions on frustrations, anger, anything? I'm sure all of you all must be having something going on in life.
Okay. Student of D Farm have a question, ma'am. And the question is, difference between having depression and feeling depression.
Sorry, can you repeat it? It was not clear.
What is the difference between having depression and feeling depression?
Very good. Okay, so when we are saying we are feeling depressed, it can be a depressed mood. Now, the depressed mood can be for a day, for a couple of days, right? But when we are looking at having depression, it is a clinical diagnosis by a psychologist or psychotherapist or a general practitioner. So when you are saying that I am in depression, okay, I'm suffering from depression, then this depression has lasted for more than 2 to 3 weeks. And you have other symptoms, like I said, physical symptoms like your sleep is affected, your food is affected, your negative patterns and thinking is affected, your day-to-day activities of life are disrupted. But when we are saying we are feeling depressed or, not necessary that will affect your day-to-day life. there's also something called dysthymia. Dysthymia is a low-grade lull, so which lasts for more than 2 years. So that is not like clinical depression where you are where you feel suicidal or you hurt yourself, but it is a state of lull. So I don't feel adequate as I used to feel, so I'm not feeling motivated enough, right? So that is another distinction where you can feel low and lull, but you're not clinically depressed. So clinical depression is a disease which has to be treated, and there are two ways of treating it. One is you can of course seek pharmacotherapy, but the other most highly used is cognitive behavioral therapy, or REBT, which is what I practice. Is we help the person through their disruptive patterns and help restructure their thinking to living a more fulfilling life. So many people in therapy talk about, oh, I want to be happy, or I want my spouse to be happy, or my family to be happy. I think we need to understand that happiness is not a destination. There are going to be, the brain is not capable of being constantly motivated. The brain needs to shut down. The brain cannot always be happy. It is going to have its low phases as well. So I think being very realistic with ourselves is very important.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the answer. And thank you, Mr. Kaushal, for the question answer.
Any questions on low frustration tolerance? And just to mention, since we are on this public platform of a university, so I think a lot of mental health today is also talking about inclusivity. We also see as the lesbian and gay rights have been legalized. We also see a lot of mental health issues in the LGBT community. And so one very clear aspect is to address certain biases, stereotypes among racial groups, LGBT population, to come towards a more fulfilling and inclusive society.
There's one more question now.
Yes.
Asked by Mr. Shivram from DFARM. And the question is, are Alzheimer's and dementia are mental health problems? If yes, then what's the difference?
So Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. So there are different forms of dementia. There are vascular dementias, there's Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is an age-related dementia where we see certain plaques in the brain. So it is a neurological disorder. And because somebody can go through dementia, they can have mental health issues. So in Alzheimer's, we see a lot of, so it is a neurological disease. So you will go to a neurologist who will assess the Alzheimer's, will give you medication for the Alzheimer's, okay? But you also can go to a therapist who then helps you how to deal with your disease. So in terms of anger, frustration, because Alzheimer's, you lose recent memory, you're unable to restore, save memory into your brain. So that becomes very frustrating. You forget day-to-day things, or where you have kept, or who you have spoken to. You can forget names, places, objects, so they will have a lot of mental health issues such as frustration, anger, anxiety, a lot of guilt and shame because they are losing their identity. But it's a neurological disease.
Any other questions?
Any of the girls? So there was a study done by this doctor called Christine Neff on self-compassion, where the study basically showed us, and self-compassion as she defines it is kindness to ourselves. And I am running that study in India today. But one of the key components of the study was that they thought that women would be more compassionate because women are more expressive. However, and unfortunately, it is the opposite way, that they saw that men were more compassionate to themselves. So women are more critical of themselves, right? I'm not sure if this is because, there are body image issues, as we see it in the media, how we see it on Instagram with influencers, how you should have a perfect body image. But definitely the self-compassion in women is much lesser than it is in men. So men tend to accept themselves as they are, but women are more critical of themselves. And this all can lead to a lot of anxiety and depression. I see some smiles, so I'm hoping you are connecting to it.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
I feel honored and privileged to get the opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this special occasion. I would like to thank all the honorable delegates who blessed us with their presence. I'm also very much thankful to all program advisory committee members and invited speakers. Thank you, ma'am, for conducting this session on such a short notice. We would like to conduct this seminar, and thank you, ma'am, for such a wonderful and informative session. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much. It was nice talking to you all. Thank you.